Hello and welcome to yet another interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming from the Mozaic Works studios, and my guest today introduces himself as somebody who helps teams create an environment where everyone can excel in their work and life. He's a coach, a trainer, a speaker. He's been known for his involvement in things like system thinking, beyond estimates, mob programming, and I'm sure we'll have a very interesting conversation ahead of us. Welcome, Woody Zuill.
Oh, thank you, Alex.
So, I have we intersected at a few conferences, I think, but it's funny that I've been following your work for some time already, and I know what you have done. And also, we had guests here, Zuill Falco, and and other people who know you, but we haven't actually, I think, sat down for a long chat ever. So this will be very interesting. I'd like to start by asking you, what's your origin story with programming? What made you, or how did you end up in the technical domain?
Well, you know, I had a business when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, where we did designing of advertising, graphics, and signage, you know, for putting on buildings and cars and things like that. And I was watching the industry closely. I'd learned to get it. As I got into that industry, I learned a lot about design and a lot about how to make a living and the tools you need to use and so on. But as the 80s were coming up, it was clear from the magazines that computers were going to become important. And I had gotten into that industry because you could make a pretty good living based on, you know, skills. You could get paid a good wage for being really good at what you do. It's a high level skill to be able to do this work. And I thought, boy, computers are going to take all that away. And I thought I better learn about computers. So I bought a couple of computers, 1982 or 83. And I bought software, and some of the software worked pretty good. The computers were actually quite solid and good. But a lot of the software I bought, I was very disappointed with. It just didn't work well. It crashed all the time. Other worse things than that, corrupted data. It wasn't dependable. And I thought, gosh, if these people are making a living writing really terrible software, maybe I could make a living writing really terrible software. So I got, you know, the computers all came with BASIC programming language. And the two computers I had, one was a dedicated computer for running equipment, but the other was, you know, an early version of what we might consider a personal computer. And so it had BASIC on it. I talked to a couple of people about what it takes to learn. I couldn't afford to go to school, and I couldn't take the time to go to school. So I just started programming. I just found, let me see if I've got it here. I just found yesterday or in the last week, one of my first books that I ever bought on programming is a book on basic programming, a Z80 chip, I think. And so I just started learning. It took me about 2 months to start making useful stuff. And there's something really critical about this to me is for back then, if I could open a file, read some stuff from the file and display it on screen, manipulate it, save it back to a file, you could write something useful. You didn't need to know much more than that. And I only had 2 or 3 hours every night to program. So I kind of naturally fell into the pattern of work that I still like to see today. And that is where tonight I'm going to write something that I can use tomorrow. And then tomorrow night I'm going to add to it. And then the next night I will add to it. And every day I could use the new functionality that I added. And then I wrote things like a thing to manage my mailing list and things to manage doing estimates for my customers. That's a field where estimates are easy and meaningful, um, and dependable. I wrote stuff for managing my checkbook because you couldn't buy, Quicken or whatever, Microsoft Money or whatever they later had. I just started writing those things. Every day I looked for something that was taking me too much time, like keeping track of my checkbook. In a small business, you got a lot of bookkeeping to do. And then like bookkeeping is another thing. You need to have some way to allocate where you've spent your money so you can do your taxes at the end of the year and know what your profit is and stuff like that. So that's the whole story right there. I started just writing software I needed. And because I couldn't buy it, or it was just not good when I bought it. It turned out programming's really easy to do. Figuring out how to make it do what you want it to do, that's the hard part. I automatically, just because of the way I felt about things, I put tests in place. There was no such thing as test-driven development. So I would I didn't necessarily write tests beforehand, but by the end of every day, I had a way to automatically prove it was doing what it would do. And then I had to write my own repository because this stuff wasn't available, at least to people like me. So how do you store off your files every day and keep a backup and so on? So there you go. That's more than enough, my origin story.
Right, that sounds quite interesting. Now, the interesting thing is I've also started with basic Mozaic Spectrum because in Romania we had clones of ZX Spectrum processor.
Oh.
Yeah, that were actually built in Romania.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it was quite interesting to boot that thing and go straight into BASIC, and the only way you could interact with the computer was through BASIC, through programming. There wasn't any other way.
Interesting.
It was really cool. All right, so then you mentioned that you wrote a few tests just before you actually knew that was an XP practice, let's say, an extreme programming practice.
Long before. Yeah.
Long before. So what was your first contact with larger projects?
So for about 15 years, I continued writing software for myself mostly. And then I started taking on mostly friends, because somebody coming in my shop and they go, hey, what you up to? And I'd say, oh, I've been writing a lot of software. They go, oh, I got something I need. So that was just my way of finding other people to write software for. And it actually was pretty fun and interesting for me. I was doing things like controlling devices, like cameras. I did like in a lot of large equipment back in those days. You could put cameras inside the equipment so that a mechanic could watch the mechanisms without being in the dangerous space of all this equipment doing stuff. So I would write software for things like that. And then my wife made the suggestion that I'm enjoying, pardon me, I'm enjoying software development more than the business we were in, and I probably should change my career. So I looked into it, and it turned out to be it was just the right time in history. In 1998, I started doing a lot of work for other people, and I took my first position outside of that, out of my company. I took a job at a company where they needed to have somebody to sort of manage a team of about 5 programmers while the head guy was traveling to go see customers. So this very first experience was the first 3 months of 1999. They had a 3-month contract to solve some problems for a big company that would contract with them. And I noticed a couple things. First of all, during the early 90s, I had learned in the business I was in how to work without estimates. And this was basically custom manufacturing. And in this custom manufacturing, I often worked on prototypes for people who were making technical things. I can mention company names, but I don't know if that's really important to do. But big, well-known companies that are still around and do create memory devices or create chips and things like that. Anyways, so that first contract was for a large firm, but I was working in a small firm that was serving them. And they were doing what I would now call extreme programming. And that's when I really started. In '98, I think I started reading up on extreme programming, or whatever. It wasn't necessarily called that then, but all these lightweight processes. You know all the names of the people who were writing about that in the late '90s in blog posts. But it was a great time to switch careers because all you needed to do is know how to spell VB, and you could get a job as a programmer. And so I knew how to program in VB. I'd also learned some C and C++ and other things, but VB was so easy, Visual Basic, and there was so much work for people. So anyways, that contract ended, and I was just so pleased. I'd moved into this industry where people were paying attention to the needs of the people doing the work, that the people doing the work were honored for their knowledge, and their ideas were being used. And that was just a big trick, though, because that was just that place. My second contract started somewhere in April 1999. And so I thought, well, if this is how good it is in the small companies, I want to see how good it is in the big companies. It must be really fantastic. That was just not true. So I went to work in this company. They hired me for a 3-month contract on a project they believed would last 3 to 6 months. They hired 200 software developers. This was, ends up being millions of lines of code, I guess, and it was just miserable. They managed everything based on estimates. They had 200 developers with a team lead for each team of 5, 6, 7, 8 people. Nobody did anything like teamwork. And as we progressed through this, we did iterations, by the way. They were following something that you might consider an IID model, which, iterative incremental development that Barry Boehm or somebody came up with, or something like a spiral model, but there weren't any deliveries to production. So every 6 weeks, we were supposed to have the whole application integrated to whatever current degree of what was written. And then we would do a retrospective, which they called the lessons learned. And in the lessons learned, I noticed the 3 big things was our estimates were off. They didn't help us. We didn't understand the requirements. We thought we did, but we didn't understand them, and they kept changing. So there's the 3 big things very closely related to each other. And after 6 months of that, it was all I could stand. The project hardly made any progress. It wasn't even close to being deliverable. And everybody hated the job. They hated what they were doing there. People were getting yelled at. There was even worse dysfunctions than that. So I thought, that's when I realized I need to learn to talk about this stuff. I want to talk about the way it was at the first place and the way it was at the second place, and say, I want it like the first place, not the second place. And so I started having to learn to speak in user groups. I thought that would help me attract people who would be interested in the same things as me, and then I can maybe find better positions for myself. But what ended up happening is, as I went from contract to contract, everywhere was miserable. And I wanted it to be like the first place and not like all the other places. So I don't know if that's really what you were asking, but so by that time, by 2000, I had already worked on some very large projects, some extremely legacy projects, which I kind of love. That first contract was with the legacy project, where they were trying to solve some big problems. And I found I really love the legacy world. And but everywhere is legacy, right? It's like once you have a project that's been delivered to a customer, that's now legacy. It's legacy code. I think of legacy code as being any code that does something we want it to do, and we want it to keep doing that. That's, to me, is what legacy code is. It's a valuable, powerful thing. It's not legacy because it's hard to work on. It's legacy because it's the value we inherit on a job. So anyway, so I got to learn a lot about working with legacy code. And then it went on. I took contract after contract. I started teaching at a university for a year. Oracle software development with the client server model. And then we had that big crash in 2001, where somewhere around there, where .com bust or whatever they called it, and then it was hard to get contracts, so I took permanent jobs. And I lived in permanent software development positions for the next well, almost 10 years. Well, no, almost 15 years. Did I cover too much? It seemed like I rambled a bit there.
Yeah, no worries. That's what we are trying to do, and these stories are fantastic for people to hear because you probably know too well that many developers actually live in those second type companies.
Yeah.
And they don't know about the other style, and when you talk to them about the other style, they look like it's impossible or it will never work. And I found
so
this.
Let's give everyone hope.
Yeah, so these stories are actually very, very interesting. Um, so another thing that I'm interested in is your history with Agile and XP practices. I've noticed that for many people, the first contact with XP practices can be quite difficult with the disciplines of refactoring, of test-driven development, and so on. How was it for you when you first tried this?
I always want to turn around and look at my books. I bought that refactoring book from Martin Fowler that he wrote when it first came out, and there weren't any tools I could get my hands on that allowed us to refactor. I had been learning test-driven development mostly on my own, but I was able to find other people that were doing it. So my first introduction to really working in an extreme way was that first contract, and they weren't doing extreme programming. They were using a lot of the ideas and patterns of extreme programming, but they were also, the guy who owned the company was brilliant in understanding how to work in this fluid, what I would consider now a lean manner, where instead of planning everything out ahead, we discover what we need to be doing so that we're not tricked into thinking that our original thinking about the project was solid. It never is. It's never the right thinking. So this person understood that. He was really big on rapid iterations. We would do deployments once, literally after 1 or 2 days. We were working on a bunch of tiny isolated things. After 1 or 2 days, we would be able to start deploying the thing. And then, so over the next week or two, we were deploying daily and proving that we were solving the problem one little bit at a time. These are all extreme programming ideas. I was using some test-driven development, but that wasn't one of the big practices there. They got to solutions quickly or rapidly, I would say, directly. So 98, I think I started reading about these things. I read the books by Jordan and Code, Ed Jordan and Peter Code, and about object-oriented programming. All articles I could find online. I read the things like programming by intent that had been around in the 90s. It happened that this guy who owned this company had been a Smalltalk programmer. So a lot of that thinking was being done in those circles. I got exposed to it about then. And as I read, when that contract ended, there was a lot I needed to figure out. And I started reading everything I could find. And as the books started getting written, I read all the books that came out about agile software development, coaching, practices. By 2001, when the Agile Manifesto actually came out and we started using that term, I recognized those 4 values as being the core of what this contract I was on had been doing. The big one being customer collaboration over contract negotiation, which meant that's why I was at this company, so that the head guy could go and spend time with the customers. He would go there, spend a week or 2 or 3 days, and his goal was always, I don't want to talk to any go-betweens. I want to be talking to the engineers that are having the problems they're having, directly to the user or customer. and these were engineers. And so, boy, that was beautiful. I really loved that. So these concepts were not foreign to me. They're what I used in my own business previously. Working in an iterative manner. I like the one working software over comprehensive documentation. What I had found in the 90s in creating prototypes and custom manufacturing for people, large projects, if they could describe everything they wanted up front, then it wasn't a very complicated thing. But I was working on complicated things. They usually think they know mostly what they want up front, but we're going to discover it as we go. And so the idea of, working software means let's get something that's working and then see what we need to change about it. Responding to change over following a plan. So by the end of 2001, I was already talking about these things at user groups. And I the first, what they, in the order, the first value is listed as individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And that is exactly everything about this is critical to me. I had learned, I've got to make a point here. When I owned my own companies, I had learned to be a crummy boss, to be a boss that I would not want to work for. We fall into those patterns because that's the pattern of almost everyone. I would read business books and, everything I read didn't necessarily work, I should say. Most of it was not useful. If we go back and read the books that were written in the 60s and 70s and 80s, we'd probably go, oh, what were they thinking? Not just about software development, but business in general. So I dedicated myself to learning to pair program. I dedicated myself to becoming good at refactoring and test-driven development. So those technical practices and the people practice of pair programming became really important to me.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I've been studying a bit about the other engineering disciplines, and this approach of building something, building a prototype, testing it, experimenting with it, this is the normal practice whenever you develop something new. We tend to think a lot about things like civil engineering, where a lot of design is done on paper with a lot of equations and physical, but actually many of the engineering disciplines are about iterating, building things, iterating, building things, iterating, and so on. So in a way, I think you are lucky that you came from this background of manufacturing, because it was easy for you to switch to that. I've noticed that many people who, and including myself, one thing that we learn in technical universities is that you have algorithms and you have a problem and you have the solution, and that's the solution, and you just go with it. And that's the thing that should work, instead of actually going and iterating and trying to figure out, because sometimes you don't even know the problem.
Exactly. That was what I was going to comment on. That when we perceive a problem, we don't understand it until we start trying to do some solutions for it. So the easy things, so Cynefin, the 4 main domains of Cynefin. Yes. Well, we're in the simple space, or what they used to call simple space. They call it clear now. We're in the clear domain. We don't even need to go find the algorithm. We just say, look at the price sheet. It's like you want 100 signs for your real estate company. 2-sided, made out of this material and this size. I just get out my price book and look up that size, and there it is. That's the clear or simple domain. When we move into the complicated domain, we need to do quite a bit of analysis. But I would argue that most analysis, if it's not coupled with trying things, doesn't get us where we need to be. But if this analysis is in the complicated domain, is mostly reading things, trying to match the problem at hand with a solution we already kind of know. If that's what we call the complicated space, then that really is just a matter of experience and staying exposed to things, being aware of how the industry you're in is changing, what are the new things coming along. When we move to the complex space, which is where I think software development is, uh, those other you don't look up something on a price list. You might use some kind of documents of that sort, but and you don't just analyze and then choose and configure the already known solutions that you have. So you have to figure out what you don't know, but you know the things you need to find out about. It's in the complicated space. In the complex space, the way that they talk about it anyways is the unknown unknowns. So I like the Cynefin framework because of the it acts as a sense-making framework, and whether I'm using it correctly or not, I don't know, but I know that it's helped me a great deal in understanding the ways that software development is different than, say, software configuration. So if you buy a big enterprise level management software for your business, the software is already written. Those people were dealing in the complex space, but you are going to just configure it. They're going to ask you, well, where's your data stored? How many tables do you have? Do you have foreign keys everywhere? They're going to figure all that stuff out. Maybe you got to make a lot of changes. And then there might be a little development to do, some scripts to write, but most of it's flipping switches. We configure it using their configuration system. That's not development. So software development's in the complex space. If it's not, then we might want to look at what problem we're really trying to solve.
Yeah.
It's like a problem that we try to solve is usually the wrong problem anyways. It's what we perceive to be the problem right now. And worse than that, it's often we're just seeing the symptoms and we think the symptoms are the problem. And then we set out to solve the symptoms, which is totally ludicrous, totally ridiculous. You cannot solve symptoms. You can alleviate symptoms. You can hide the underlying problem. Like if you have a cold and you're sneezing a lot, maybe you buy a decongestant, but it doesn't heal the cold. It doesn't get rid of the cold. Only sleep and drinking plenty of fluids will do that for you over time. So yeah.
Still, you are absolutely right. I think the same, but I've noticed, however, a trend in particularly in enterprise where I talk to programmers, and what they do all day is fundamentally writing a new service that takes data from one place and puts it into another place. And that I would hardly call this complex domain. This is more like...
So that's not development the way I see it.
Yeah.
We should automate that and use a tool that does that work for us rather than writing it. If we do that all day long, we haven't seen the abstractions. And so seeing the abstractions moves us into the complex domain. How do we find that out? And then how do we deal with those? What are we going to create that will automate this process for us? But you're absolutely right, but I don't personally think of that as being software development. That's the same thing as, we're essentially just applying our standard techniques over and over. And that's where I started in software development. Is here are the things I do over and over. Every day I need to save all the design files we worked on that day to our backup storage. And in those days, that was on disks. Let's automate that. Rather than me having to go in and physically find those files, because maybe during the day we worked on 40 files, I could have something that just goes through the disks that I've been working on. So a human has to be there, plug each disk in, but it finds anything that was changed today and copies it to another disk. Because fortunately, my first computer had dual floppy drives, so I could do this. So it's the automating that's the work, not the following some rote steps to do that. That should be automated.
Okay. So you've been involved into a lot of things, but I think when you got into prominence, let's say on Twitter, and was with the no estimates movement. So I think we should at least touch a bit on it. What do you think about, what is your vision on no estimates or beyond estimates?
So the term no estimates came from a tweet that I made in 2012, December 10th of 2012. And the reason I know that is tomorrow night I'm giving a talk on no estimates. And I looked up some things out of my notes and some of my previous talks. And so I saw that. I wrote it. So there's a guy who's pretty well known in software development, agile world, Ron Jeffries. Ron was kind of there at the beginning, and a lot of his thinking was used in developing the concepts of agile. And he and I were having a discussion, to put it politely, in Twitter, where he was kind of incredulous, saying, I'm not understanding what you're talking about here. Why don't you write a blog post? So I had already been writing some blog posts, and to be really clear, nobody ever read my blog, so I kind of stopped writing them, and or didn't write much. But I'd already been writing and thinking about what I came to call no estimates on that day. And this is the point. I wanted to share a story. It was sort of a conglomerate story, but it was about a real project I had worked on that was failing, that was in production. It had been in production a long time. They were adding new features to it, and in so doing, their repository for their code had gotten corrupted, and so they were at a stage where their code, with the current code, they were able to recover, but the interim code that was done between when they started on this to when they ended, or got to where they were, had been corrupted. So things were not going very well for them. They'd been working on it for a year. They couldn't do bug fixes. They couldn't do anything. There's nothing deployable. They couldn't take a bug from a customer and fix it because the code base was not deployable. And so that's the basic story of this. When I went in to work on it, they asked me, what should we do? And I said, well, let me look at what you're trying to do. And I couldn't understand any of it. The requirements documents were not very good. They had estimated everything. They knew how long it would take. They had already used up all the time they had, and they had nothing usable to show for it. So I looked at it for a day, and then I told the boss, the highest up, the top person in the company, I said, this cannot be salvaged, but we need to salvage it. He said, well, how much money do you want to spend on this, old car that the brakes are bad, the transmission's going out, the carburetor's shot, the engine is froze up, because you put new windows on it. Do you want to spend money to fix all the rest of it? That's kind of where they were at. Right? And I said, let's do a 1-week experiment. Let's just let's revert. We'll work on the code that existed before your team started working on this, and then we will do one thing. And so rather than make an estimate, we're just going to invest 1 week. And the technique that I've been using for years is basically you want to do something that anybody thinks is important. It doesn't have to be the most important thing, because through doing it, we will learn how important it was, and it will help us think about, well, what do we want to do next? That will help reveal the next thing we think is important. And they chose something, and it was the fundamental thing. The reason they wanted this new functionality is this one little area. So I looked at it, and it was like 5 or 6 pages written down. The more you write down, the harder it is to understand. So quit trying to clarify ourselves so much. I read it and I said, look, I can't understand any of this, but I can understand these little parts. And I finally got them to say, well, so there was like 5 or 6 things this little function, this little feature was trying to do. If we could do just 1 or 2 of these little parts, would that be helpful? It turned out it would be. Because what they had done in this feature was to break down a process that was being done essentially manually, people searching through files alone or writing little database scripts, really hard to find the records they needed. So I said, okay. So I looked at it and I removed what wasn't cohesive. In other words, here's some things that belong together, and here's some things that don't necessarily need to be done as part of this. So we just broke it apart. But the end result was We ended up doing about 10% of that one feature that was one of about 80 features they wanted, a whole bunch of documents. We delivered it. We did no estimates to figure out what it would take. We got a small thing to work on, not by estimating is this small. We made it small by looking for certain qualities. Those qualities are, is it distinct? And distinct basically means we can sense that this is a thing. You know, if you take a walk out in the forest, you can see a tree, it's distinct. You say that is a tree. You see a mushroom, it's distinct. You say that's a mushroom. When you're out of the forest and you're way up above and you look and go, those are trees, but you're not seeing the distinct trees. So you get into it far enough so you can see the mushrooms and the trees and that. So when you find something that's distinct, it can be decoupled from everything else. You just need to figure out how. How do we unravel it from everything else? And that's pretty easy to do. Just in software development, we talk about things being loosely coupled and highly cohesive. This is the concept of cohesiveness in the way I use this. Cohesive means these things belong together. So I'm looking for something that can be decoupled, and that means it's got to be cohesive and distinct from everything else. It has to have some kind of value, and that's an estimate. We estimate, so someone will say, yeah, I think this is a value. It's kind of a snap judgment. It's, if we tried to spend the time to estimate how valuable it is, I think we're starting to waste time. We just say this is something we want. So as long as it's distinct and it's understandable, that means I have to bring it down to something so small that I can understand it. And I'm not like the brightest guy in the world. I'm not the sharpest pencil in the box, or whatever you want to say. It's hard for me to understand stuff. So if you can make it easy for me to understand, that's probably pretty good. But now we have something we can work on. So rather than do estimates to discover or uncover smallness, we just look for something that's distinct. And that's a judgment. You can say that's an estimate too. That's the problem with this. Estimates are just kind of a way of making a judgment about something, but usually we say an estimate involves calculation and things like that. There are things we can estimate that are useful. So to put a cap on all that, I wrote that article about how we worked without estimates. Now that project for me went on for 4 years after that. But over the next month, I've got to change the terminology here. They wanted this new reporting system, but after we did about 4 or 5 of those small things, out of the 80, we only worked on 4 or 5 things, and of each one of those, we only did a very small part. I went into the boss after the 4th week or so. I don't remember exactly now. I'd have to read my notes. And I said, what do you want to do next in this project? And he said, well, we have something else that's more important I want to get started on. This exploded in my brain now. This was, I think, in 2003. This is what Agile, to me, was all about. Discovering just enough. And when we've done just enough, and we can't discover that if we're not deploying, if we're not getting working software. If we get working software, that means somebody's actually using it. It's doing what it was intended to do. So in this particular thing, we only did a handful. And then they said, there's this other thing to work on. Now they had lost a year, spent a year of development team money to get something that never worked. And now we spent a month to not really need or want the rest of it. This is what some people call drip funding. You try a little thing, you turn on the faucet just enough to get some, get it started. You try something, if it brings you value, you're going to get one of two things: some kind of usefulness or some knowledge. And usefulness could include monetizing. Usefulness could include if it's a game that people are playing that particular feature, they love this new part of it. It doesn't matter what the usefulness is. We're either going to get knowledge or some kind of usability, useful aspect. I don't need estimates to do that. Now, I had done that in my custom manufacturing stuff. I found that the customers were more interested in solving their problems and getting value than they were in what it would cost. And there's a key to this. Once you get good at delivering value in small bits, it pays for itself. We no longer need to worry about how much will it cost us, because it's already paying for itself. The money needed to develop it is generated by the stuff being developed. We no longer need to budget for how much will this cost. Can we do this for 18 months before we start getting value out of it? Well, this was early agile thinking was if we can deliver value a little bit at a time, then we will bring in a lot more value, whatever that value is, enough to pay for the ongoing development of this thing. And if you're in business and trying to make money and you don't understand this concept, you definitely should close your business and go do something else, because this is fundamental to business. We don't say, we've got $2 million in cash. How long can we keep our business open? And then when the $2 million runs out, we have to close our business. That would be ridiculous. What we do is how long before we start earning some income? And that means, if it takes us 5 years to get to that point, we better have a lot of money on hand. If we get good at delivering value in little bits quickly, we can grow the business, hopefully a lot of it based on that cash flow. And I'm not like a super businessman, but I've been in business in many different ways. I think it's a valid way to go, is to work more on a generate the income you need. Once that's happening, you can start on something else and start on something else. Why should we decide between project A and project B? I've seen this at so many companies. We have to decide which project we're going to do because we only have so much money to spend. Well, if we choose to do project A and 6 months down the road, we go, this isn't working. Boy, did we waste a lot of money. And then we say, well, should we try project B now? But if we tried both project A and project B at the same time with the same outlay of cash and learned how to monetize both of them, we can decide which one do we want more of, which one do we want less of. So this is literally to me what no estimates is. We worked without estimates, and it worked out well for these people. They kept me on. It was my side job, so to speak, for 20 hours a week for 4 years. They kept me there. We kept writing the software, adding new features, and we didn't do any estimates at all after that. The boss realized, getting something into use quickly is way more important than figuring out what we can get done over the next year. I mean, it's laughable to me, but it's a sad thing. Sad thing. So did I cover too much of no estimates there for you?
Absolutely not.
So that article, I want to finish that thought. That article started getting a lot of people attacking me about why I'm wrong. And that turned me into somebody that people wanted to invite to come to conferences and speak. So I want to say thank you to those people who constantly attacked me. I know I try not to communicate with them because it's just meaningless to me to do that. But thank you for attacking me, because that turned into an important growth in my career.
Well, it's still interesting because I definitely understand where you are coming from, and I had these experiences as well. I ran a few projects without any estimates. We picked the most important thing. We were trying to limit it. You said in scope, we were also trying to look at it like, will it fit within 3 days of development roughly? So
sure. I see a lot of that.
Yeah. Because so asking precisely how long it takes, that invites a lot of error in estimation. But thinking of whether it fits or not within a time frame, that helps you at least. It's easier to figure out, let's say. And I think it helps you understand the scope a bit better.
Yeah, and so for me, I don't think those are meaningful things. In other words, can we do this in 3 days? Well, if we become good at looking at the discrete parts and the cohesive nature of it, can it be decoupled? And that's not from a code point of view. That's from a usability or user's point of view. Will this create something somebody can add to what they're using? I don't care if it takes me a half hour, a day, 3 days, 6 days, 10 days. When we get good at, it's really, let me just kind of, I use this as a demonstration. I'm just going to let's pretend that this is the project. This is what we want. We kind of want a thing that does all this. If it's a reporting project, like we're going to add some reporting functionality to our existing software, then these are all the things we want in it. Well, I think this right here represents inventory. Just the thinking about it represents inventory. And in lean terms, inventory is waste. Inventory is one of the big wastes. I think to me, it's the second biggest waste. The first biggest waste is queuing or waiting. And in most companies doing development of any kind, doing product development, not just software, but designing a new printer or developing a new service for their customers or a new course for their school or whatever, they're working in development. Queuing is the biggest waste. And queuing and inventory go hand in hand. We get inventory because of queuing, and we get more queuing because of inventory. So it's a vicious cycle kind of a thing. So they came to me, there's the 80 things. How long is this going to take is what they originally determined. And they actually, they estimated all this stuff. That represents work. So this represents inventory. That estimating, that documenting of all the things we want is work we've done that isn't yet delivering value to the customer. So if that's the truth, then that's what inventory is defined by. At least that's how I understand it in the lean manufacturing world. If we're building a car, any one part of that car is inventory until it's all put together and the car is delivered to an end user. That's when that leaves inventory. Same thing with software development. And for those of you out there who are kind of sophisticated with this stuff, I'd love to hear from you how you measure inventory of software in your company. Not what applications do we have, it's what have we worked on that is not yet being used. So again, this is the way it would go. I say, okay, I can't understand, nobody can understand all this. Why did we waste that time when we could have just said reporting system? Now, what do we want out of the reporting system? It could be as simple as we'd like to have, let's say we want a purple one. We want, out of this reporting system, we want a report that looks like this. Well, what goes into it is, you have to select the criteria for this. What date range do you want? What age group do you want to work with? What location you want to work? All the data that you could have that would end up in this report. Well, those are discrete things. What age, is that part? What location is that part? And so on. Those are discrete. We can take those apart. So we're still in the forest. And now I want to get down to the trees. So once I've discovered a tree I can work on, we can ask, is it potentially valuable? But that is sort of the starting point, because the product expert is sitting with us and we're deciding, can somebody use this if we deliver just that part? Now we have to determine, is there anything in here that we just don't need? It's not totally cohesive with this. And as we remove those chunks, we're getting down to something we can actually understand. It's small enough to write a unit test or two, or maybe a dozen. I don't care how many unit tests. I don't care how long this will take. All I know is, really, this, I can take anything out of it, and I know that is smaller than this. I don't need to estimate that that's smaller. When I rip it up, I can guarantee you, by the laws of physics, I suppose, that both of these are smaller than that was. That's how we get to smallness, not by judging is it small. Can we do it in 2 days? But by actually just making it smaller. If we make it as small as we can and still have the qualities I'm looking for, and I don't demand that I find those precisely, but we got to understand it sufficiently to work on it. The real understanding comes in the doing of the work. The doing of the work reveals the reality, and that's where, so what we judged would be 3 days turns out to be an hour or 6 days. I just want to know that I got something small, and I do that without the estimates. If I estimate to be small, I'm still going to learn I was wrong anyways. Just gets me something I can work on. When I deliver that, and if you remember what I said earlier, that's how I first started working. 1982 or 3, I'm pretty sure it must have been 83. That's how I first started working. If I'm trying to keep track of my check register every day, the first easy thing I could do was simply enter each check on a thing and print that out. Store it and print it out. The next day, I could learn how to do a running total. The next day, I could learn how to associate customers with it. or people I'm paying, payees I'm paying, and so on. Each little thing added to the value, and eventually, some of those little bits come back. They're done later, and sometimes we just go on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, doing as little as possible each time, rather than the 20-80-20 Pareto principle. We're kind of compounding the Pareto principle. We're doing 80-20 twice, once to determine what to work on, and then once to determine how much of that should we work on. What's the 20% in this that would give me this? That's what I mean. The 20% of work that'll give me everything I want or as much as I want. When we find that, we stop. We don't need to give anything more. So yeah, I think that we trick ourselves into thinking we need to somehow know the future. And if you figure out how to do that, let me know. You won't probably want to share that secret, but we can't know it. And so we think we need to make decisions like, what can we get done in the next 2 weeks? There's this process, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's called Scrum. And a lot of people follow this process, this methodology. And all I can say is that was a stepping stone for people who were mired in the older days of waterfalls or phased approach or phase gated or whatever. Scrum was a way of taking a step forward, but that they kind of codified or formalized sprints of this length. XP had some of that idea in it too. That the shorter we work on something, the better. And they talk about deliver something every few weeks rather than every few months. I think we have to think of it this way. If we respond to change, we can sometimes see the change that happened. Like when we went from delivering every 6 months or at the end of a project to delivering every 2 weeks, what were the benefits and how can we get more of that? So the change is going to be internally generated. We're going to say, that worked for us. How do we move forward? And I think this, the basic concepts that some people call Kanban, but the very basic idea of just limiting work in progress. This is a manufacturing concept, limiting the work in progress, only creating things the moment you need them. So in manufacturing, like you won't make a carburetor, well, they don't use carburetors anymore, but fuel injector, you won't make the fuel injector until you put it on the car. That would be ideal limiting work in progress. That limits the inventory, and it reduces our cycle time from the beginning to end. Yeah, so estimates are a trick we play on ourselves because we so desperately think we need to know how much will this project cost and how long will it take. And there's reasons we want to know these things, and therefore we think we should be able to know them. But our desire to know them taints our ability to realize that this estimating stuff hasn't been working for it. I've been doing software development for 40 years, and I've read books that go back to that 40 years at least, where they were describing how to do software development. And somewhere in there, it became really good. I've got 2 books here. I don't think I can grab them right off my shelf, just on managing projects that are very heavily based on estimating. That we thought we needed to do that. It's never worked. For 40 years, everywhere I go, people still say, we're having trouble with estimates. We need to learn how to do better estimates. Well, if you say we need to learn how to do better estimates more than 10 times, and you've tried 10 different ways to get better, stop, right? Don't keep thinking. We need to get better at the thing that we really think we need to depend on. Maybe we should find some other way to do our work. And that's, to me, what Agile is. That people shoved the concept of estimates into Agile is depressing. There's a couple people, I won't mention any names, but 3 or 4 books were written about software estimating. I've got all of the books. And that was a real disservice to our industry and to our developers. Can I say one more thing? I've just been going on and on about this. Sure. If you're a manager of software development and you think you need to go to your developers to ask them how long it will take to do something, I'm going to challenge you. Why do you need to talk to a developer when you are at the level of a manager to understand the work that your team is doing? If you don't understand it, you probably shouldn't be managing people who are doing the work. So if you don't understand what it takes to do, if you look at something and go, gee, I don't know how long that'll take, I better talk to a developer, then you probably don't have the skill set to manage software development. But there's a trick here in what I'm telling you. You can't do it either. So you're passing the buck. If you can't do it yourself, please don't go to your developers. You're following. We have beliefs and biases that taint our ability to see this clearly. Now, I'm guilty. I'm a human, right? I'm guilty of these same biases and stuff. I try to keep a very open mind. I'm yet to see a value in going to a developer and asking them how long will it take you to do something, because all we can ask them about is something close to ideal work days or something like that. And how are they going to know what that is? Because your problem will never be able to be defined where they know what they're going to be up against. Another really bad thing is, well, you need to estimate how long these things will take because we need to hire some developers to do the work. You're estimating how long it will take someone you don't even know to do something. To me, it's bizarre that we think in these ways. I've just offended everybody out there, so I probably should stop.
No worries. It's very interesting. It's a very
So
interesting
how was that for a rant?
Very good. I still like to challenge a few things.
Sure.
Because personally, I completely agree. And whenever I can work, let's say independently, that's what I do. I find a problem. I try to figure out the smallest problem I can solve.
Sure.
I solve it in the shortest interval of time that I can, and then get feedback on it, see how it works, learn more about the problem, and move on, and just keep repeating these things. And it works excellent. This is how I'm managing infrastructure for Mosaic Works, and this is how I do that. So it's my way of, and I take detailed notes and so on. However, there are a few things. So you are talking about a context where you have like a reporting project and so on. There are industry or areas of product development where you need a minimum set of features just to enter the market, right?
So yes,
because you are competing already with a few. So then it doesn't work to push out very small features and get feedback and so on. So how do you deal with that?
Maybe. So this would be, I would first ask, is that just dogma that we want to say we need this, so therefore how would you solve it? I think it's dogma. I think that most people believe they need to have a certain set of features, and I believe that this is not reality. If we're trying to compete with someone who's already done what our product is going to do, first of all, why are we limiting ourselves to that? And secondly, have we identified all the potential users for what we're doing? Because it's very possible. I mean, I'm just throwing some ideas out there. I think that we need to advance our thinking about what we consider to be the product we want to deliver. So one example is we want to put a rocket on the moon. We need to design a nose cone that will get us out of our atmosphere without burning up. What are we going to do about that? What are some of the things they've done? One thing is having some kind of material that will withstand the heat. Another is to have some kind of covering over that nose cone that will burn off. It will disintegrate as we go so that it will dissipate the heat. And there's lots of things about this. Well, that's great. So if our goal is to get to the moon, I don't know if you remember, there's a famous story about one of our long gone presidents saying we're going to get to the moon at the end of this decade. How's that for an estimate? So that's not an estimate. That's a lofty goal. So here's the thing. In designing all of these things, there are many things that got invented that could be used by something other than a moonshot. So that's just one thing. If people are listening to this and they caught on to that idea, we really limit ourselves when we say, when we're done with this product, our intended customers will expect all this in there. And I think we've limited ourselves to thinking about the wrong customers. So, or limiting ourselves to only think about one potential group of customers. If in designing my rocket ship, I come up with a new, let's just say, aluminum alloy, that would have nothing to do with the nose cone, but maybe the structure inside is holding something. And we discover a new alloy that ends up being really great for making bicycle frames, then let's find that customer base too. You know, it's like we limit ourselves as to how we're going to go about doing this, and businesses, you know, they're stuck with this. You know, even like a company like Sears that was massively innovative about controlling their value chain. I don't know if they're completely out of business now, but you know, Sears was a big U.S. marketing giant and invented a lot of really powerful things, including this concept of managing the value chain from front to back, based on price rather than based on cost. Yeah, so I think that we want to believe we need to know when we can deliver this thing, and I would just say which is more valuable: getting something that's generating income for you so you can continue development, or learning how much money you need overall before you can even start, and then taking this really huge risk that can we get it all done, and why is it important to know that? So that's the challenge. Let's see if we can rethink why we think we need this. And the estimates won't help us, by the way. The estimates are false information. It's made up. We want to believe so difficult a thing is possible. We so much want to think we need to know the future that we're willing to believe that somebody out there can teach us how to do it. And if I really wanted to make a living, sure, I'd just teach how to do estimates. There's so much written on it, and I can teach you how to do it, but I wouldn't be serving you very well. You'd have to pay me my ridiculously high fee, and I just got to get out of town before you discover this doesn't work 5 years later. Because you won't, eventually you'll go, we're still not good at this. And then 5 years later, we're still not good at this. So we want to believe we need to make those kinds of decisions. I think we're trying to decide the wrong thing. So I know that's not going to be acceptable. So many companies believe we need to know how, we need to decide which projects to bring into next year's budget. And we only have $22 million to spend on new development. So out of these 12 projects everybody wants, we can only choose that'll fit into that budget. So we need to evaluate all that. That's all inventory. It's all waste. Just the making of the decision is waste, and we never get the learning we could get if we found a better way to work. So throw another one at me. I like addressing these, and I know they're not going to be satisfying answers, but you can see the pattern that's starting here.
Yeah, sure. Another one that I've seen is projects that have hard deadlines. Things like, so there are two types here. One of them is, let's say if you think about the game FIFA, it has to go out on a certain date because that's how it is. If it goes later than that, it's like it doesn't go out because it doesn't sell. So it needs to go out at a very hard deadline. This is one example, but the other type is compliance type projects.
Sure.
Particularly in banking, insurance, things like that.
So if we handle those one at a time, so if we have a hard deadline, and I can give you a good example of a hard deadline I've had in two different things that are not software development. One was a customer came to me with a large project that was attached to a big sporting event in the U.S. that happens once a year. And this is the all-star game of the Major League Baseball. Baseball is a game where somebody holds a ball, somebody holds a stick, they try to run around. Yeah, it's a fun game to play. It's kind of fun to listen to on the radio, kind of soothing. But anyways, this is an event that is planned years in advance. They know what city they're going to do it in. They know everything about it. And this particular part that I was involved with is a group that did one aspect of it, which is one of the events that goes along with it. And they needed to get a lot of work done, and they were way behind schedule. When they came to me, it had 2 weeks to be done. And so the approach I took, this is way before, this was 91 or 92, somewhere back then. This is way before Agile was a thing, but it was the way I was working. And they came to me and they said, look, Our current vendors are failing. They are not going to be able to deliver what we do, and this is what we did. Here's all the things they wanted. Tell me the first thing that's most important. We're going to start on it and get the least amount done on it and deliver. And you're going to be involved every day looking at it. So you're going to be able to say, that's enough of that one. At the same time, we can pull out others of these. Because while we're waiting for materials and stuff to show on, and the one designer's working on this, we can do this other one. Again, we're looking for some small part of this to deliver right now. I'm going to do that example one more time. Let's say it happens to be they want a white one. Let's do this much and then decide, do we need the rest of this? Let's find the core, and this really is punching little holes in this, finding little bits of this that are cohesive. This is the same thing. If we have a hard deadline, our job is to figure out, can we get it done? Our job, of course, we use the estimates to plan how we'll get it done. And so, sure, we need to make judgments, but estimates are not judgments. Estimates feed judgments, and I believe they are pretend. We think we need the estimates, so we have some idea of how big or how much this is, when instead we should be looking for the qualities of smallness, the qualities of what's the least we can do here. And rather than estimating that, we look for the things that are cohesive, the distinct part of this that we think will bring the most value. So estimates don't help us do any of the planning, in my opinion. We say, this is what people often say when they're confronted with this. They'll say, well, the estimates are the best information we can get right now, so we just need to work with that. And I say, we're trying to make the wrong decisions. That's the difference here. You are stuck on the idea that you need to make some kind of decisions that are based on us knowing how long something will take, or how much it will cost, or can we get the parts in time, or whatever it happens to be. So that's the, we need to deliver on this deadline, or else it's going to be worthless to deliver. If I couldn't get as much done for them on the date of that sporting event, I couldn't deliver it the next day and say, sorry it was late, I'll give you a bit of a discount. No, they'll say, we'll see you in court, and you will be unhappy that you did not serve us well. So this is the point. Now, the thing about regulations is the first thing we have to understand is that area is in desperate need of understanding this problem. So anything of this sort, no estimates is for the people using the estimates, not for the people doing the estimates. So in a regulatory world, if your bank is being regulated, let's say you've really had a lot of trouble handling fraud, and so your bank is being closely guided by the banking institution, governmental level. They'll say, we need to see what you're going to get done when, and so you have to provide that for them. There's no answer to that. You can say, well, if I could tell the future, why would I bother owning a bank? I could steal money from people just by placing bets on the horse races because I have special information. The reason I own a bank is because we can make a lot of money off of people who are less sophisticated than us. That's kind of a joke, bankers. Don't think I really mean that. But you get the picture here. The bankers and the people creating the software, they don't know how to do this predicting any better. Otherwise, we wouldn't have swings in the stock market and stuff. Everything would always be better all the time. So there's a couple things about the regulatory part of it. If they want you to tell when it'll be done, make your best guesses, but get good at delivering quickly. Get good at making progress and finding the core of something quickly, rather than, because estimates, as according to Michelle McCarthy, she says estimates, the problem with estimates is she says the problem with schedule is that it makes us think we can take that long. Let's get good at doing the little bits that are important and then see if we still need to add a little bit more. But there's another side to this regulatory stuff. They are often giving you extensions all the time. We say it's got to be done by this point, and then there's 12 other banks that are in the same mess, and they are coming back and saying, we can't do it in this time after it's getting near the deadline, and then, there's an extension to the deadline. Rather than 2024, we now can take till 2028, So those things can be negotiated. We're trying to solve the wrong problems. This is what I'm saying. That's what no estimates is about. The bigger part of no estimates, are we willing to question the status quo? Are we willing to question the practices we so desperately believe in and the things we so desperately desire? We need
Yeah,
to do that. So give
yeah.
me another one. Give me another. I know I'm not giving satisfactory answers, but this is, I'm just sharing with you
Well,
how I feel.
actually, I wanted to add to what you're saying that I work with companies in these contexts, and in terms of hard deadlines, one thing that I notice again and again is that they plan and then they go very close to the end of the period, and then they realize, oh, we are not finishing in time. And then I ask them, okay, so what do you do when this happens? Well, we descope. So how about you descope in the beginning instead of descoping in the end?
Exactly. So what I describe this as you know how you do a mountain climb. You're going to climb this mountain and then you're going to come down, and that's how they're seeing software development. As you climb up the mountain, you know it's harder and harder, and then eventually you're going to have most stuff worked out, and it's going to become easier and easier. But it's more like hiking to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. You start off, it's easy. We got 2 years to do this, and we get a lot done, but it's all the wrong thing. So then in this later part of it, it's a real difficult climb out after we've used up all our energy, after we've used up all our supplies we brought with us. And hiking out of the Grand Canyon, depending on which route you take, you won't even get water for 10 miles. You need to bring enough water with you, and you don't have water. So yeah, this is the problem. What you just described, I've seen it over and over. One of my maxims is stress in software development completely destroys our capability. And crunch time is an example of that. And you just described crunch time. When we descope near the end, that doesn't mean there's things we are not going to do that we haven't yet worked on. It's things we are going to stop working on that we're nearly done with, but we can't get it to work. We're going to have to pare it down to something that's working, and that means we've expended. This is a lean concept. We've created too much stuff that's not going to work, so we've used up all of our money. This is a huge focus. We've used up all of our time, and now people are working late. People are working. You got to come in on weekends now. And of course, does our best work get done when we're under pressure? It doesn't. So,
Yeah,
okay. So I know we're in agreement on most of these things, but it really comes down to this: the people who are asking for estimates, who are meant to be business experts, I believe, need to scrutinize why they believe the things that they believe.
yeah,
That we have just bought into. By the time you get into a position in a company where you're asking other people for estimates, you've bought into the processes they're already using. It's the system that this organization is, not necessarily that they're using, but that's what this organization is. It's a system. And by the time we've risen that high in an organization, we've bought into all this dogma and the status quo and the way things are. And I don't
okay.
see a lot of hope for solving for that.
So I will throw the last one at you because I'd like to move on also to a few other interesting topics.
Do we
And
still have time?
well, from my part, yes.
Sure, I'm willing to go. I kept my time open for you. So.
Cool. So another thing that I've seen is you have a large project and you have 20 teams working at the same time, and you need coordination between the teams. Like somebody needs to end something before you can start, or any kind of, this type of dependency train.
Yeah. So that brings up a good point. Why are we allowing that? That's the whole point. So we haven't found effective ways to work, so we manage ourselves in a very ineffective manner. So that's all that is. So Conway's law, which is about the pattern of the organization or the structure of the organization, imprints itself on the software. So if we have a database department and a testing department and a front end department and a back end department, and these people are working independently essentially on the same thing, we're going to introduce these dependencies. Why did we automatically do all these dependencies? Now, Conway's Wall is just one way to look at it, but I would say we put into place dependencies that we think we need to have, and I don't think we need to have them. Like Alan Kelly talks a lot about this. If you've never interviewed him, I would definitely bring him on. He works out of London. He used to talk about beyond projects, and most organizations are doing work that they're not really capable of doing. They're attempting to do work they're not really capable of doing. They're not capable of managing, and yet there's business reasons or business. I'm going to put it in quotes. You use the word needs several times. We need to coordinate these people. I think coordination has extremely high costs. That we have separated people so they need to be coordinated introduces extremely high costs. There's a high cost of miscommunication occurring. So communication becomes very expensive. Collaboration doesn't happen, and yet collaboration is what we need. So yeah, to say, oh, there's dependencies, this needs to get done first before this can be done. Well, then let's get really good at doing the very minimal amount of this so that this can start going. And I think that can usually be done at the same time. And people will argue, yeah, but we're sending this thing to Mars. So, we can't deliver it in little bits, and we can't just do a little bit. Well, yeah, there's always constraints like that. If you're working on a project sending something to Mars, you wouldn't be talking to me anyways. You're already so deep in a bureaucracy, a bureaucratic way of working that you have to buy into it. If you can find a way to change it, maybe you'll be like an independent rocket company like we see nowadays that are trying things in very different ways. How many times have I heard it? We're not a small company anymore. We need to control all this stuff. But to quote Bjarte Bogsnes from who wrote the Beyond Budgeting, implementing Beyond Budgeting, says the desire to have control is a big barrier to change, but the control is just an illusion of control, or usually it's an illusion of control. But the fear is real. We're afraid. It's a barrier to change because we're afraid we'll lose control. We're afraid to lose control that we don't have. We're afraid to lose control that is just an illusion of control. This is the human nature. We want to know, when will that be done so that this team will work on that? Why do we need to know that? If we don't have something for them to be working on, we haven't broken things down in a good way. Let's work on that. Let's not try to stay busy. Let's get the people collaborating. And as Alan Kelly would say, something like every 200-person project it's got within it a 20-person project that's trying to get out. We do these huge projects because we think that's what we need to do. It's all just the dogma of how this work gets done. Yeah, I'm not the big leader on this topic, but this has been written from Brooks and Jack Reeves and on and on and on, and all the big business gurus like Russell Acuff and Deming and so on. So, yeah, I'm just an observer, and I'm just somebody who's trying some ideas. I'm not an academic. So, do you have any more of those you want to try?
Well, I think there would be a few more, but I'd like to move on to another interesting topic, which is mob programming, where you've been involved a lot. And we've already heard the story of mob programming from Llewellyn Falco on this channel as well, but it would be interesting to also hear how you arrived at this idea.
Well, so Llewellyn was someone I was interacting with quite a bit at the time I was doing this, and I don't think mob programming would be a thing without Llewellyn. But I was working with a team. I was hired to work with a team that was not doing very well, and I took on the job. I already had a good job, but I was looking for a bigger challenge, and this looked like exactly something that would suit me. At the same time, I was looking at other companies and expressing certain ideas about the way I would help a team become more capable. And there was always some roadblock at the other companies. at Hunter, which is the place we originated the idea of mob programming, um, I was given the opportunity to work without interference. I wouldn't have. That's one of my demands that everywhere I had gone at that time, these other companies that had interviewed me, I said, you know, I need to work without interference because I'm here to solve a problem that you're bringing to me. You're saying we can't, we're not getting this to work. This team or group of teams isn't doing very well, and so you're asking me for help, and that means I can't buy into your way of doing things. The reason these teams are failing is because they're being poorly managed. That management doesn't know how to manage software development or what these teams are doing. If you knew how, you wouldn't be talking to me. So Hunter agreed. The people who hire me at Hunter agreed, and I know that could be a showstopper. So what basically happened was I have 5 or 6 ideas that are really important to me about how a team can make improvements. And one of them is, you know, the key thing is we need to learn how to work well together, and how are we going to go about doing that? And we need to have psychological safety. We have to have a way of sharing ideas and not feeling that we will be belittled for it or that it will hurt our career or something like that. We need to know what work is going on in this group of people. So if we have 20 people, let's say, we need to have a way that's easy that everyone can see every day where we're at, so there aren't hidden things going on, hidden work getting done, you know, and things like this. These are all related to Agile. Certainly not, none of this was Scrum. I don't put much faith in sprints and ceremonies and all the stuff that they do in that world. It has a lot more to do with lean. How do we see, how can we make it easy for us to see things? And so one of the big things that I wanted to do was give the team a chance to study on team time. In other words, rather than having to spend your own time at night, which I think is good to do as well, I've always done it, but while we're at work and getting paid, we're going to take some time to improve capability. And that part of that is learning. And part of that for me is learning together, because learning together is a way of building our ability to work together without the pressure of doing the work. So that means we need to practice the skills. Now, mob programming didn't exist, but at the time, pair programming existed. So one of the things I was doing was just sharing with the team.
Okay.
All the practice they would want to do. One of the things every Friday, and to be really clear about this, is studying together gives us a way to learn to be together. But I wasn't going to force them to do that. And I didn't know what we were going to learn, what we wanted to learn. But I knew the results of this would help us learn to get along and work better together. Another thing is, I believe that the people doing the work are the ones who can best determine how to manage that work. So I wanted the team to become self-directed, self-managed, self-organized. All this came to a head one day. We've been doing these practice sessions once a week where we used what's called a coding dojo of a particular type, and it was explained to me as being a randori. I never really quite understood that name, but a randori is where the way we would do it was one person's at the computer and one person's navigating that person at the computer. Person computer we call a driver, and then the navigator is guiding them on what we will do. And then we switch that out every few minutes. So if what we're doing is learning something, we might be doing exercises that help us learn that thing we're trying to do, like practicing that thing we're trying to do. And we would just rotate through that throughout a session. At the end of the session, we will all learn something. We'd all had a turn at the keyboard. We'd all had a turn guiding someone else. Here's the things we're learning. We're learning to explain ourselves better. We're learning to use a whiteboard so that we can express our idea in a way that it stays after we're done talking. We're learning to listen to someone else. We're learning to use their idea. And the rule we had was only the navigator, the person guiding, can talk. When it becomes their turn to drive and the next person comes up, it's their turn to talk. Nobody else is allowed to talk. So we were learning to be quiet. We were learning to hear the other people, be willing to try their idea. There were other rules that I used. But this grew into mob programming on one day. And that day, someone came to me with a big project. I had asked when I was hired, I need to have the right to cancel work. I have to have the right to postpone work. Because if the team's trying to do something that they're failing on, they shouldn't have been asked to do that work. That was a failure of management. That was a failure of the business. So to put an end on this, one day, one of those projects that I had postponed, we needed to work on, the people, the person that had worked on it before asked me to work on it, that we should start up on it again. It was very late already. And so they looked at the code. They said the code was terrible. What do you want to do about it? Let's get together in a meeting where we can look at the code and decide who should be working on it. We went into that meeting thinking that's what we were going to do. When we came out of it, we were doing mob programming. We actually started using the techniques of the coding dojo, but on real work, and it expanded instantly into not just one person talking. Only one person talks at a time, but everybody contributes what they think needs to be contributed just at that moment. So the idea of mob programming is everybody working at the same time on the same thing in the same space at the same computer. We're all looking at the same screens, at the same artifact, and so on. It worked so well for us that we didn't stop after that day. It was accidental that we did it, but we were learning to turn up the good, to look for the good things that are happening. In the 6 months before this, we were learning to do this. And everybody said, let's just do this again tomorrow. So to me, that's the nutshell story of how mob programming got started. For me, it included, having learned about the coding dojos that came out of the software craftsmanship group in Paris. And it got to me through Llewellyn Falco. He shared with me the coding dojos and showed me 5 or 6 different ways to do them. And we used to do them together in a few user groups, and I kept doing at least 1 or 2 a month that way. So my own progress was I'd been a pair programmer. I understood test-driven development. I was trying to bring these things to the team at the same time, getting good at working back.
And this, so my first contact with mob programming was interesting because it was quite a failure, to be honest, because we were a group. We didn't facilitate in any way. We're a lot of, let's say, hard-headed people and kind of trying to push our ideas and so on. And it didn't work. But then when Llewellyn facilitated one session, that's when I understood what it's really about and how it can actually work. So there are many interesting things, many interesting things that can emerge in such a group. Have you ever seen it failing with people?
Oh, sure. Just in the same way that you've just said. So it's like, with anything, if you put a band together of each person just wants to play the solo all the time, you don't really have a band. You have a bunch of noise. If you put together a band where everybody allows others to bring their idea, I'm talking about like a rock and roll band or a jazz band, or I used to play folk music, we have a protocol we follow. You take your lead and I support you while you're doing it. And then I take my lead and you support me. When we're singing, I might sing solo and then we'll sing harmony. But if you have an idea of what we want to sing and I have an idea of what we want to sing, and so we're singing 2 different songs at the same time, unless that was very carefully choreographed in the first place, that's going to fail. So if you just take 5 or 6 people, especially, you kind of self-described as hard-headed, put them in a room and expect them to work well together when they've spent the last 20 years of their career insisting that their idea is the one that they're going to use. That's not going to work. So the problem comes when we try to do it without understanding what it means to work well together. So the opposite had happened for us. We were learning how to work well together over a 6-month period before we even stumbled upon the idea that we could do our work this way. We were starting to pair program and starting to learn to pair program really well, using that idea from Llewellyn that I had got, which is for an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. And that's what I consider the driver navigator model. And some people call it strong pairing. Whatever name you call it doesn't matter to me. The thing is that if we don't have a good protocol to use and we're not willing to try other people's ideas, mob programming is not the way to work. So yeah, it certainly can fail, and I've seen it with many teams. When I've been called to come in and work with a team that is doing mob, and they got many other teams that are working well with this. What I will usually see is people that are very uh, obstinate about this is the right way to do this. And I use a saying from my father. He used to say something like this: "There's 1,000 right ways to do anything. We should never insist that ours is the one right way. If we can't do that, we can't work as a team." So sure, there's really brilliant people who can't work as teams, but I think if we practice a little bit, we can become good. So there's other reasons it fails. Sometimes it's because the protocol doesn't allow us to collaborate. So if we use yeah, so if we don't use Llewellyn's concept, and we just whoever's at the keyboard is the one with the idea, then that's going to make it really hard to do. If we try to get too insistent on the code looking exactly how we want it to look when we're navigating, that will cause a dysfunction. Which I will just let me say a high level intent as a navigator, and let the person at the keyboard, if they're capable, to do the actual code. And I don't care what the formatting looks like. That can be fixed later by hitting the format key, right? I don't care if they're using the exact mechanism that I would have used. That doesn't matter as long as they achieve the intent I was asking for. We can always refactor that. That's another thing. If we're not using test-driven development, we're probably going to have trouble working as a team. There's a lot of skills we need to have to work as a team, but there are parallels to this in sports, in music, in all kinds of business contexts. In a company I had, we would often go and install signage and things onto buildings, and you have to bring a team to do that. You don't send the person out with the crane, and then when he gets back, you send the person with the sign, and when he gets back, you send out the electrician. No work can get done at all that way. You have to work as a team. I'd actually do it where I'd be at the top of the building and lower myself down to where I could hook up some wires or something. Uh, that requires a team itself. Like, what if I get stranded up there? What if somebody turns on something electrical while I'm in the middle of working on it, and so on and so on? We need to be able to trust each other. We need to be able to work well together, or else somebody's going to get hurt. So it's the same thing. We've spent 20 years learning to be solo and insisting that solo is the way we want to work without ever practicing or giving ourselves a chance to realize we can work with a group. Einstein is a good example of doing both, and I think we need to be able to do both. He often met with other physicists, or whatever they called themselves in those days, to work out ideas where they couldn't actually physically experiment with anything. They did thought experiments and things like that. But he also did a lot of thinking alone. I can imagine if somebody kept a journal of Einstein for a week, we would see some weeks where he was completely in his own head, and some weeks where he was. There's an old saying: "How do I know what I think about it until I talk about it? Until I tell someone about it?" That's when the thinking gels. I think we would find he used all these mechanisms, and why can't we too at least try some? So yeah, there's lots of failure in these things because people aren't willing to work well together, or they feel under pressure that they need to get this done, and they'll get it done better if they don't have to work with someone else.
And I think that when people first hear about mob programming, I think you realize that it sounds like a very weird idea.
Yes, sure.
Instead of one person delivering one thing, we get 10 people or 7 people working on the same thing, and it sounds weird. Now I understand why it works. It works because we are working with knowledge, and because we are discovering things, and because when you have more brains at the same problem, you have more ability to find the best solutions, or a better solution.
We're applying all of our force at a single point. And if we get good at this, it's not, let's just say 5 or 6 people. I've worked with teams up to 14 people that were all, the knowledge was needed from 14 different people to get this work done. It's not 5 people working on one thing. It's 5 people working on a variety of things, getting each one starting and getting each one done directly. So it's just that when we divide the people up and they're all sitting separately, they might be working on 5 different things that will all be brought back together soon. They're still just working on that one thing. They're different parts of that one thing. But we don't have the advantage of the other brains unless we go and ask somebody a question. And then we have to bring them out of their context, bring them into our context. That's very cost. That's the high cost of collaboration that way. That's still collaboration. It's just a very costly collaboration. One thing that happens with mob programming is if you do it well, in my opinion, you don't feel as stressed or as pressured or as busy. You don't even feel as productive, but you are more productive. It's because we're working directly on things. If we look at this thing and we're going to elect correctly with all the mind power that we have, all the brains on it, it gets done with a much better solution than if we had separated the parts of that and people would done it separately. We're still just working on one thing, but instead of separately, we brought the brains together. But this is the same. So would you go watch a soccer game or whatever you call it if it was a solo soccer game where it was just one person playing against someone else? Well, that's not the game of soccer we like to watch. So we're going to watch a game that's got whatever number of people on it. Same with the baseball. If you just want to see a guy throwing a ball up in the air and hitting it over and over again, you can watch that. But that's not much of a game, and it's not very interesting. There's a lot of endeavors that we do that require more than one person to accomplish what we're trying to do. Baseball, soccer, football, whatever, it's all good examples of this. Playing music is a good example of this. So I'm going to have a wedding. We can't afford a full band, so we're just going to get the drummer. Okay, that would be a very special wedding. But for the band, for the dance we're going to have after the wedding, we want the whole band there. And this is sort of what we're talking about. To get the thing we want, maybe a team is a better way to do it. Think of a surgery team. You got 5 or 6 people all standing around one person, and that one person is laying down, and we're taking parts out of them or putting parts into them, or sewing stuff up inside of them, whatever it is. Do we want that? Imagine if you got wheeled into that surgery, and you said, wait a second, I don't want to pay 5 people to do the work of one. I'm having a surgery. I just want a surgeon. Get rid of all the rest. I'm not going to pay for that. Well, no, we need everybody to have a successful surgery. Yeah, we think, this is again, back to what we talked about earlier. It's dogma that we need to divide the work up. It gives a job to a manager whose job is to organize, prioritize, schedule, coordinate things, be the go-between on all that. Do we really need that? I think a manager's job should be very difficult. But yeah, there's lots of failures, I'm sure. I've taught over 1,000 teams to work this way because I know I've done over 250, maybe as many as 500 workshops. So at each workshop, there's usually 20 people or so. And I know they're all not successful doing it afterwards. But boy, I hear so many reports back of how successful you can be with it. It takes time. It takes practice. You need to practice without doing work. You need to practice on easy stuff. I often recommend that. Start on the easiest things. If you can start on exercises, just do that. But otherwise, start on the easiest things. Learn to play, your scales first, and then a simple piece, a simplified version of something that Bach wrote or whatever. You get the idea. I hope.
Sure. All right. I'd like to go back because we should be getting close to the end of this conversation, but I'd like to go back to what you said, how you introduce yourself on Twitter, that you help teams create an environment where everyone can excel in their work and life. And I think this was a line that went through all our conversation. I was just looking at and thinking about what you're saying, reflecting on what's behind all these practices, and I think that's true. But perhaps it would be interesting to explore a bit more and say, okay, so what are other things that you do in this direction?
So the start for a lot of this thinking for me came about when I realized I'd become a boss I would never want to work for. Back in the 90s, I always tried to be the best I can be, the best person, and kind and a good boss. But I turned into a boss I don't think I would have wanted to work for. And I started trying to explore this, and I found books on things like self-directed work and all of that sort of thing. During that period, I started realizing that I was managing trying to coordinate the work of a very small shop. My shop was never bigger than, I think, 13 people. I have since then managed groups of much larger groups, but back in those days, uh, I realized I would come in very early in the morning to get the day coordinated, and so that when the people arrived, they all had things to work on, and they had the right things to work on, and that we had the things to that they were coordinated. So when this thing got done, the next person could do that thing, and all those dependencies. And then, but it dawned on me as I was studying this that I had worked in an environment where that really wasn't done back in the late 70s. They used what we would now call a lean mechanism, where nothing was made until a customer ordered an item. And in this particular factory, they were making musical instruments. When that order came in, there would have to be certain materials on hand, but the work would start, and it would go from start to finish, similar to Kanban, the idea of cards that would be spread out through the company. The parts that I would make would be made just in time. The parts I would make were like the resonator on a banjo, the back part of a banjo, the rim of a banjo, which is a circular thing that the head of the banjo gets attached to, if you know what a banjo is at all. But it's a musical instrument that we used to joke, one banjo is one banjo too many. But anyways, so the card had come in. I knew what I needed to make, and I knew how to make it as directly as possible from start to finish. So it didn't matter. They didn't need to schedule for that. It's just they needed to tell me I needed to make this. They had broken the work up in such a way that all of us could work essentially separately on our different parts and have them all come together at exactly the same moment, including some things that were teamwork. That came bubbling up in my brain, and I realized that's sort of what I want to do. And lean was starting to be talked about, and books were written on it. So as I looked for that stuff, I found it. And so this is where it all comes back to. We need to respect the workers that are doing the work as having most of the knowledge about how to manage this thing, most of the knowledge on how to be really effective. I often see this. Managers make it. There's a famous quote that's attributed to Peter Drucker. It goes something like this. Much of what consists of management is simply making it hard for people to work. To me, this is the misplaced focus of management. Management often does things in a way that makes it easy to manage, but it doesn't make for a very good outcome, or very good results. It makes it hard for everybody to work. And in a way, it's easy to manage because it's you just fill in charts and you fill in documents and stuff. But if we release ourselves from that, so this is what I think in software development. We don't need to control the people doing the work. We need to liberate the people doing the work. We can't take advantage of their abilities unless we make it easy for them to excel, make it easy for them to do really the best they can do. And this isn't something that happens automatically, although in some organizations it does. Everybody in your organization is already motivated. They're just not motivated to do things the way you want to do them because you're trying to force them to do things in ways that nobody can be motivated about. They're not motivated because you're trying to guide something that's best when it's allowed to apply its own thinking. But we need to learn how to do those things. And if we're going to collaborate well, which I think is critical, there's a book I'll turn around and point at by Amy Edmondson, Teaming. It was written maybe 5 years ago now or so. She makes a very good point that most of the work in most organizations, at least within knowledge work, is no longer single person work anyways. There's no project you're going to work on where there aren't other people working on that project. And if we put together a company, we know we need all those different skills and all that knowledge. It's how good are we getting at working as a team that makes it work. Russell Ackoff would say it's a system is not the sum of the behavior of the parts. It's the product of their interactions. That's really critical. And most organizations do not understand it. Can an organization understand anything? The knowledge is really just held within the individuals, but they bend to the pressures of the organization. And we end up dumbing everything down, managing things in such a manner that it's not effective. Another great quote, Breen's law. Have you ever heard that? Breen's first law. Eventually, every company runs out of time to succeed in spite of themselves. In other words, like software development, dang, if you can't make a lot of money in software development, you probably should stop. You should retire or stop trying to do business. There's so much money to be made, but still, companies fail, and they fail in spite of themselves. I mean, they succeed in spite of themselves, and eventually we run out of time for that because there's just so much money flowing that eventually it comes crashing down. The weight of the system that we allow to become in place. Now we're talking about John Gall stuff, so I could quote these folks ad nauseum. Did that even come close to saying what you asked?
Sure, yes. Well, it's been fascinating, a very interesting conversation. I like to move on to how we usually close these
Yeah,
conversations.
sure.
We have 6 questions that I like to ask everyone who joins us. Um, and the first question, these are open questions, and you can answer or not. It's up to you. First question: what book did you like and would recommend? You already recommended a few, but it can also be perhaps something different. It can be
Sure.
fiction, it can be non-fiction, it can be management, business, whatever comes to your mind.
So I think I'm gonna go in the different vein and said "Going Postal" by Terry Pratchett. It's one of his Discworld books, and I recommend it very highly for managers. Any of his books are probably really worthwhile for managers. Terry Pratchett was an astute um, observer of the human condition, and so he wrote in his stories are in a fantasy world, so that he can make fun of all of our weaknesses without having to, make it people that exist in our world. They're fun. And, yeah. In that book, he pretty much points out to me a lot of what's wrong with the way business is, and why the workers, the people who are most able to innovate and invent things, are being harmed in this process, and we never get the advancements we could get. But there you go. How's that?
That's a very good recommendation, and this reminds me that I have to pick up Terry Pratchett because I haven't read any of it yet. So
So the cool thing about Going Postal and most of Terry Pratchett's books, you can get them on Audible. Now, I read them originally in paperback form, and then I got them in Audible and some of them in Kindle. And then Going Postal was actually made into a 2-episode um, TV program in the BBC, so that can be purchased pretty cheap on your iPhone or whatever. And so you can actually just watch a version of it. It's very entertaining and not exactly the same as the book, of course, but has a lot of the same gist to it. But the book itself, Terry Pratchett is a real wordsmith, really capable writer.
yeah,
It's a shame he passed away.
yeah. Okay, second question: what category of books you don't read too much and why?
Oh, any book that has the title in it, something like, uh, the 10 things every great manager does. There's only one of those books I think that I've sort of enjoyed. It's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I think is jam packed with great info. Most of these books, they kind of try to condense it down, and they have something like that. You got to have these 12 traits if you're going to be successful. I think that's yeah. So there's a category of books, but in a bigger sense, I read almost anything. My main focus has been on teamwork for the last 5 or 10 years, but certainly I like read. I do it this way. If I pick up a book and I just randomly flip to it, read one part of a paragraph, and go, "Oh, that's interesting." I flip to another part, read one part of a paragraph. If I can get 5 places quickly, and there's something interesting at each place, that's probably worth reading. And so, and I try to read books in their entirety. I try to read 2 books a week, like this one that I just showed you. So,
Cool.
if I can, and when I'm traveling, I certainly can. But I usually find time when I'm walking and listen to a book.
Yeah, cool. What topic do you think is not discussed enough in the industry, in our industry or communities?
Yeah, I think that the big dysfunction in our industry is the way we do things is based on uh, human contrivances that never really worked, but they worked in spite of themselves. And then we start thinking we succeeded because we followed these things, when in reality it was just luck, like Kahneman talks about, talent plus luck equals success, and great success is a little more talent and a whole lot more luck. So I think that's true. So I think that we ignore the idea that we are working within systems and that we are attempting to devise our own new system as to how we should work. And I don't think that works. I think that we're planning and doing all this work at the wrong level. So in our industry, if our industry is software development, but business in general, uh, that's a topic I think we need to understand that we are we are mostly controlled by our beliefs that are faulty and biases that are part of all humanity. That's where the greatest advancements will be made if we ever get there.
Oh, what topic do you think is discussed too much in the industry or in our
Ah,
communities?
well, how to do estimates is one of them. I started speaking about no estimates as a thing because of two things that years ago, because of two things that happened. And one of them, I was at a conference, an open space style conference, and I went to 6 or 7 sessions. At each one, people were talking about estimates, although the topics were very different. It was like planning topics or delivery topics or whatever it was, but somewhere estimates came up and way too much. So yeah, I think that this is just another sign of we still aren't good enough at estimates. Why aren't we getting better at estimates? I think that, but I don't know what else. I think all the stuff that I see at conferences about, you know, continuous deployments, continuous whatever, uh, those are important. I think all the stuff about the technical, we have to keep, the technical stuff's changing all the time. Security, super important. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff being talked about, and I haven't got bored with it yet. So
What would be your ultimate career achievement? So something that you do and you think I could retire now?
if we get to the point where uh, almost everybody in software development and really lots of other disciplines are collaborating at a high level without them ever needing to know I exist, then I would be really happy with that. I think mob programming is where it's at because in 2012, people started asking me about it, and I thought, oh, I better figure out how to talk about it. And I think we're still at the state right now where my involvement allows more and more people to become aware of it, just coming on podcasts like this. So the idea of mob programming, or as some people call ensemble, is one way of collaborating. But I think I would say it's a high level type of collaboration. So right now, I think I still need to keep sharing this. Um, yeah, I took it on as my um, purpose. Once we started, I took my original purpose was how do I make this team, I actually had these two goals. Uh, I want to make it where when everybody comes into work every day, they as they drive in, they say, "Oh, I wish I didn't have to work, but I'm really glad I'm coming to work here because this is so cool." And then I wanted to be the second goal was when we have a job opening, each person on the team would instantly send their emails out to all their friends that they say you should come work here. It's so good. So I figured if I could accomplish that here, then I could go do it somewhere else and somewhere else. And I've already been experimenting with that. And this is just the bigger thing because I didn't know we would discover that working as a team, and I'd rather just call this team programming, something like that, or mob programming or ensemble programming. Team programming is a powerful thing, and it goes for so many things. So yeah, if everybody in the world learns to work well as a team, so they can become effective really rapidly without the storming and needing to do the norming stuff, that we just drop in and we are effective. yeah, I wouldn't have to do much. I would just fade away.
And the last question, what advice would you give to a younger version of yourself?
Yeah, I've thought about that actually quite a bit because I do get a lot of younger people that seem a lot like me, and it depends. So I can't give advice, but I can give my opinion and really can share. So if what you want is to have a career that you really enjoy, you got to figure out how to get that. But if part of it is making improvements within your organization, I think that the thing that I ended up doing that helped me the most was getting credibility outside the organization. And I got that by speaking at user groups. And I was not a very capable person as far as speaking in front of others. And I had to, I spent 5 years slowly adapting myself to being able to speak in front of people. There was a time when I couldn't speak in front of 5 people without stuttering or clamming up or being able to put my thoughts together. Now I do it too well. I guess I just ramble on and on. But back then I couldn't. I was afraid. Maybe I don't know what. So if somebody said, "What should I do?" and I often say this: if you can learn to present something that's interesting to you to other people who might be interested, then you can start building the career you want in helping make the changes in our industry or in the world in general. There's so many good examples of that. It didn't come naturally to me, but that was a good thing. There's many others I can tell you. Learning to influence without having authority is probably a useful thing to do. So that's a version. Speaking at user groups is a version of that, and there's lots of ways to do that.
All right. That was it. Before we close, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience that we didn't talk about?
Um, so there is kind of, I think, something I want to hear back from people. So if you see me, like we've been trying mob programming and it's worked really well for us, or we've been trying mob programming and it's not going very well. I like to hear these things. I want stuff I can be thinking about. If you're successful in using estimates, I'd like to know how you're using them and how you measure your success. So those are some things I'd like to hear back from. I do want to make a plug, if you can leave it in for me. I do workshops and coaching, and this is sort of how I support myself right now. I'm not trying to get rich. I'm trying to keep them going broke. So if you need a workshop, would like to have someone do a mob programming workshop, I do no estimates workshops. I can't believe people want me to do that, but I do that too, and other kind of coaching, other kinds of coaching, and I do talks. But now you've heard everything I've got to say, so I don't know if you do a talk. What do you think?
All right. Where can people find you?
The easiest way to get to me is just through Twitter or LinkedIn. The nice thing about LinkedIn is if you come into LinkedIn and find me there, and I'm just Woody Zuill on LinkedIn, and then send me a connection request or whatever they call it, I always accept those. In Twitter, I don't necessarily follow everyone who follows me because it's overwhelming, but you can always send me a DM in a direct message in Twitter. I do have a couple websites where I've got some blog posts, mobprogramming.org, and I've got another one. I don't know what the URL is. And I've got one recently, woodyzuill.com, but I don't do anything with these. So, you can probably find an email to send me an email there or fill out a little sort of contact things. But I don't blog much.
All right, Woody, this has been an absolute pleasure. It's been very, very interesting, and thank you so much for joining. Uh, so thank you so much to everybody for watching this. For I think it's been a very interesting conversation. Uh, I was impressed with Woody's understanding of all these things, and particularly with the humane take on working in software, which is something I'm very fond of. If you look at the other things that we've done on this channel. Um, There are a few videos you can also watch related to this. One is Llewellyn Falco's on the conversation with Llewellyn Falco, where he talks also about mob programming and a few other things. And another one, since Woody mentioned surgery and surgery teams, we actually had a chat with Professor Roger Kneebone, a surgeon who also wrote a book about craft and how craft appears in all types of domains, many types of domains. So much more interesting content for you to watch. We have to pay our dues to the YouTube algorithm, so please like, share, subscribe, tell other people, leave us a comment, you know, the usual things. And if you have ideas about who other people to invite or to chat to, please let us know. We are always interested in learning from you. Thank you so much for watching, and this has been it for today. Until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.